Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 1, Text number 4. Famous verse from Shukadeva Goswami. Word for different word. The words Deha Patya Kalatradish Atma Sanyesha Asatvapi Tesham Pramato Nidhanam Pashyan Api Na Pashyati Deha Patya Kalatradish Vatma Sanyesha Satyapi Tesham Pramato Nidhanam Pashyanapi na pashyati Deha Patya Kalatradish Vatma Sanyasya Satsvapi Tesham Pramato Nidhanam Pashyanapi na pashyati Deha Patya Kalatradish Atma Sanyasya Satyapi Tesham Pramato Nidhanam Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma Sanyeshva Satsvapi
Atma Sanyesha Satsapi
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha Patya Kalatradishu Atma Sanyeshva Sattvapi
Atma Sanyesha Satyapi
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma Sanyeshu Asatsvapi
Atma Sanyesha Satsapi
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma Sanyeshva Vatsvapi
Atma Sanyesha Satsapi
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha Patya
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma Sanyasvatasvapi
Atma Sanyasya Satsapi
Tesham Brahmato Nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidhanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Deha patya kalatradishu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma sanyeshva satswapi
Atma Sanyasya Satsapi
Tesham brahmato nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidanam
Vashyanapi na pashyati
Pashanapi na Pashyati
Deha patya kalatradeshu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma sanyeshva satsvapi
Atma Sanyasya Satsapi
Tesham pramato nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidanam
Pashyanapi na pashyati
Pashanapi na Pashyati
Dehapatya kalatradeshu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma sanyeshu ashashtvapi
Atma Sanyasya Satsapi
Tesham brahmato nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidanam
Pasyanapi na pasyati
Pashanapi na Pashyati
Deha patya kalatradishu
Deha Patya Kalatradishu
Atma sanyeshva satsapi
Atma Sanyasya Satsapi
Tesham pramato nidhanam
Tesham Pramato Nidanam
Pasanapi na pashyati
Pashanapi na Pashyati. Word for word, Deha, body. Apatya, children. Kalatra, wife. Adishu, and in everything in relation to them. Atma, own. Sanyeshu, fighting soldiers. Asatsu, fallible. Api, in spite of. Tesham, of all of them. Pramata, too attached. Nidhanam, destruction. Pashyan, having been experienced. Api, although. Na, does not. Pashyati, see it. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Persons devoid of Atma Tattva do not inquire into the problems of life, being too attached to the fallible soldiers like the body, children, and wife. Although sufficiently experienced, they still do not see their inevitable destruction. Purport. This material world is called the world of death. Every living being, beginning from Brahma, whose duration of life is some thousands of millions of years, down to the germs who live for a few seconds only, is struggling for existence. Therefore, this life is a sort of fight with material nature, which imposes death upon all. In the human form of life, a living being is competent enough to come to an understanding of this great struggle for existence. But being too attached to family members, society, country, etc., he wants to win over the invincible material nature by the aid of bodily strength, children, wife, relatives, etc. Although he is sufficiently experienced in the matter by dint of past experience and previous examples of his deceased predecessors, he does not see that the so-called fighting soldiers like the children, relatives, society members, and countrymen are all fallible in the great struggle. One should examine the fact that his father or his father's father has already died, and that he himself is therefore also sure to die. And similarly, his children, who are the would-be fathers of their children, will also die in due course. No one will survive in this struggle with material nature. The history of human society definitely proves it, yet the foolish people still suggest that in the future they will be able to live perpetually with the help of material science. This poor fund of knowledge exhibited by human society is certainly misleading, and it is all due to ignoring the constitution of the living soul. This material world exists only as a dream, due to attachment to it. Otherwise, the living soul is always different from the material nature. The great ocean of material nature is tossing with the waves of time, and the so-called living conditions are something like foaming bubbles which appear before us as bodily self, wife, children, society, countrymen, etc. Due to a lack of knowledge of self, we become victimized by the force of ignorance, and thus spoil the valuable energy of human life in such a vain search after permanent living conditions, which are impossible in this material world. Our friends, relatives, and so-called wives and children are not only fallible, but also bewildered by the outward glamour of material existence. As such, they cannot save us. Still, we think that we are safe within the orbit of family, society, or country. The whole materialistic advancement of human civilization is like the decoration of a dead body. Everyone is a dead body, flapping only for a few days, and yet all the energy of human life is being wasted in the decoration of this dead body. Shukadeva Goswami is pointing out the duty of the human being after showing the actual position of bewildered human activities. Persons who are devoid of the knowledge of Atma Tattva are misguided, but those who are devotees of the Lord and have perfect realization of transcendental knowledge are not bewildered. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnana Jana Shalakaya Chakshuru Malitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Translation: persons devoid of Atma Tattva do not inquire into the problems of life, being too attached to the fallible soldiers like the body, children, and wife. Although sufficiently experienced, they still do not see their inevitable destruction. Really nice verse. Very poetic. So in the Mahabharata, this famous verse was spoken by Maharaj Yudhishthira to Yamaraj when asked, what is the most wonderful thing within this material world? And Maharaj Yudhishthira says, Ahan yahani bhutani gachanti ha yamalayam sheshastavaram icchanti kim ashcharyam ataparam. The hundreds and thousands of living entities meet death at every moment. But a foolish living being nonetheless thinks himself deathless and does not prepare for death. This is the most wonderful thing in this world. So as Prabhupada was more or less quoting that verse in the purport, everybody in this material world is subject to death, and Krishna says it as well. Abrahma bhuvana loka punarvartina arjuna. Abrahma bhuvana loka. Abrahma bhuvana loka. Puna avartina arjuna. Etc. 8:16. That Prabhupada is quoting it. From the highest planet down to the lowest, all are places of misery where repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains the Maya Bodh does not come back to this material world. So, from topmost planet down to the lowest, everywhere in the material world, this is Martyaloka, the place of death. And everybody has to suffer this experience. So one either suffers that experience, or they are protected by the Lord and they go back to the Godhead, or they go to a more favorable position to perform devotional service. It's Krishna's promise. Of course, we want to become a devotee so that we can be protected by Krishna, go back to Godhead, or go wherever the Lord wants and continue our service, continue our spiritual advancement. So therefore, we should not rely on these fallible soldiers. So the person is devoid of Atma Tattva, or knowledge of the self, knowledge of Krishna. Their motivation in life is sense gratification. And they're trying to hold back the waves of material existence that are crashing on them by these fallible soldiers that give them sense gratification, like children, society, wife, body, etc. But actually these fallible soldiers are also a source of pleasure, but also a source of pain or distress, because the body gives so much distress, especially in old age, and even in youth also. Young people also experience diseases, difficulties in health, death, etc. And children are such a great source of pleasure for the parents, but also they become a source of distress too when the child, gets hurt or under their protection, or the child neglects the parents, or the child runs away from home, causes so much distress, etc. And we see that in the case of Maharaj Chitraketu, how all he wanted was a son. That was the pride and joy of his life, is to have a son. And so he could not have one, actually, with all of his millions of wives. So then he asked Narada Muni for the benediction to have a son. And he had a son. It was Narada Muni and another sage. He had a son, but it was explained to him that this child would be the greatest source of your happiness and your distress. And he thought, okay, yeah, it's okay. I'll get the good times and the bad times. This is life. So he accepted, yeah, okay. That's okay. He was elated by joy that he would have the potential to have a son, so therefore he did not mind the distress that was awaiting him. Of course, he didn't mind at the moment. But the son was born, and the son quickly died. And then he lamented like anything. So this is an example in Bhagavatam. Of course, there's so many examples in our lives. You can see that we gave our parents so much distress and happiness. And then one spouse also can give so much happiness, so much distress. Society, nation, etc. So the point is that these things cannot protect us from death. But Krishna can. Krishna does. So if we rely on Krishna, which is the only sane position to be in this material world, is to have dependence on Krishna. He is the only consistent variable, scientific term. He's the only consistent variable in our life, in our whole existence, and will always be the most consistent variable. We had different bodies, different lifetimes, different species of body. We had various children, different species, so many children, so many spouses, husband and wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. We had so many of those things, and they've all changed. But Krishna has always been there. And when we come to the material world to neglect Krishna, he comes as well as Super Soul. So he is the most consistent variable. So that is the whole process of yoga, is to link up with the Supreme, Bhakti Yoga, with devotional service, to regain that loving connection with Krishna, and then be able to rejoice in that loving reciprocation with the Lord and you and his devotee. Which, as we hear from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and especially Chaitanya Charitamrita, how these loving exchanges are the most relishable and for the soul. So this person is devoid of Atma-tattva. They have no knowledge of this, so therefore no knowledge or experience, and therefore they continue on trying to enjoy their senses. but are baffled at every moment by the material nature because of this happiness and distress that we have to experience in this material world. So yes, that's the most wonderful thing. Everybody's dying. We see it. But everybody's thinking that I will live forever. So that is conditioned within us. So then we have to hear about death. We have to think about it. We have to inquire. We have to try to understand what should I be doing now to prepare myself for after death or for death. And that's what Maharaj Parikshit's question was. His first questions to Shukadeva Goswami. What should I do? I'm about to die. What should I do? What should one hear about? And he gave the greatest example here for 7 days straight about the glories of the Lord. No food, no water. Just focus on hearing. So to prepare for death, Krishna's it's a practice, sadhana bhakti, and one is practicing controlling the mind under the rules and regulations of bhakti yoga, and they are practicing becoming Krishna conscious, trying to regain that consciousness that is already inherent within us, but we have become conditioned by the modes of material nature. And so therefore we cannot see clearly. But as we continue on performing devotional service, our senses become purified, and then we can actually relish Krishna's various attributes, you could say, his pastimes, paraphernalia, his name, etc. Yeah, Prabhupada says, yes, Maharaj?
The world has set aside these important tasks to try to understand what the real problems of life are. And they make so light of it. And yet they still make propaganda. And in the future, by the help of science, we'll be able to live immortal. We won't have to die anymore. Even so-called learned persons sometimes say that publicly. There was one article I read in the 80s. They said by the year 2000, death will probably be... He was a big leader, big scientist, medical person, and he said probably death will be obsolete by then. So this is how intoxicated this society makes us. And we can see even before the child is born, no plans are made for educating the child in the important thing, like how are you going to deal when you die? What's going to happen then? And that's considered a morbid thought, and one is not supposed to think about it. And the children are not supposed to think about it. If the children say, what's going to happen when I die? They either give some superficial so-called spiritual answer, or they just say, don't worry about it, or we'll deal with that later, or you just have to die, there's no alternatives. And how silly it is to waste time in frivolous activities when these important questions are still unanswered. So, do we want to be part of this? Do we want to be leaders or followers in this type of a society that is so blind to the real problems of life? Or do we want to take them up as soon as possible? Therefore, one should not delay. One should not postpone or procrastinate about becoming self-realized and learning Atma Tattva. When we're out distributing books, this should be our mood, that they're losing their time, they don't know when they may be called by Yamaraj to meet their change of body experience. So it's so important that they start now, begin, because a little on this path is so valuable. Neha vikramanashosti pratyuvaya navidyate salpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahatobayat. A little advancement engaged in devotional service has so much benefit. Now they've taken the opportunity to come closer to Krishna, and Krishna doesn't forget that. He's always waiting for the next step, the next opportunity to go closer. So we have to understand ourselves this and dedicate our lives completely to solving the death. The problem, there's a verse in Bhagavatam that every rising and setting of the sun, one's time is lost, one's lifetime is spent, except for those who are engaged in hearing and chanting about the Lord, who are engaged in devotional service. Their time is not lost, their lifetimes are not lost. They're gaining immortality. Although the soul is eternal and immortal, no one knows that, and they have to keep changing bodies. So we have to be examples of those who are taking life seriously. That means taking death seriously. If you can't take life seriously without taking death seriously. Therefore, our friend George Harrison, he wrote a song called The Art of Dying. Quite a sobering song. Who writes a song about the art of dying? Well, I mean, death groups. He was talking about deathbed songs and things. But generally people write about I'll go on living, I'll love you till the 12th of never. We'll go on and on our loving affairs. I'll love you always. So this is all bogus. This is all romantic talk just for the immediate moments of wooing someone. But in reality, it doesn't hold up. And no claims other than to take complete shelter of Krishna will succumb. Not even if one takes shelter of a demigod. One may take shelter of Brahma, but of Brahma Bhuvana Loka, from the highest planet of the material world down to those, all places of misery, where repeated birth and death take place. So if one is still caught in this repeated birth and death, he's failed to achieve the success he could have in this human form of life. The devotees seem like they're sometimes fanatics because they recommend taking this up so immediately, but still it's their duty. And even if the people don't appreciate, still some do appreciate, and the main thing is that Krishna appreciates. Krishna appreciates that the devotee's starting, he's making that effort, and even if he's apparently not successful, it doesn't matter because Krishna is just happy that the devotee is trying to do his duty and assist him in his work of bringing back all the souls back to Godhead. That's what Krishna wants. He wants all the souls back to home, back to Godhead. He doesn't like to incur punishments on the parts and parcels of living entities. He doesn't have any hatred for anyone.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, Jaikesha Prabhu. Your hand was first.
Hare Krishna. Thanks for your points about dying and what we should really be searching after in this human form of life. I wanted to, if you don't mind, I wanted to read a short little thing that I wrote for my mom's funeral. I thought maybe others would want to hear it. She left her body about a year ago, and this story, you guys will see why I find it relevant. But there was about 50 people there, maybe something like that, my family members. Good morning. I want to thank everyone for coming to my mother's celebration of life service. Also, thank you to those who helped organize the service. There was a photo slideshow, so nicely captured little memories in Mom's life. Of course, there are so many more photographs and memories not shown. I want to relay some of the impressions or marks that Mom left on my life since we first met 23 years ago. Mom had a nature to persevere through adversity. For example, whenever we would go camping during the summer, it was bound to rain and storm at least one of the nights, even if the weather forecast was predicted for clear skies. Everything was planned meticulously, what we were going to eat, the games we would play, and so on. The affair was at least planned 2 weeks in advance or more. So would rain and storm, loud thunder, strong wind. After a couple hours, most of us would be in the car. Not Mom. She was bound to stay in the tent all night and then wake up in the morning to make breakfast like nothing happened. Mom was always good about making sure we had everything we needed. She was thoughtful in that way. Also, a thoughtful grandmother in the same way. The last 4 or 5 years, our relationship was mainly over the phone more than in person. We would talk at least once a week about so many different topics. Mom was always curious to know what I was up to and asked several questions about it. Her interest in my daily life activities showed me that she deeply cared about me. Mom was a seeker. She wanted to know the truth about life. She sought this truth out in many ways, from her conversations with local Jehovah's Witness congregation members who would come by to see her at the house, to Facebook chat groups, blogs, close friends, and so on. She also embraced the loveliness of everyday life. Cup of coffee, hugs from her daycare kids and grandkids, the little things in life. The last 3 months have been a roller coaster for us all, but it also gave us some time to take stock of our lives, to get a better grip on reality. During this time, I often thought of a conversation from the Mahabharata, an ancient scripture with origins tied to India. It took place on the bank of a cool pond between two great personalities, one who had knowledge of religious principles and another who was testing his knowledge of religious principles. The inquirer asked, "What is the most astonishing thing in this world?" The response was, "Hundreds and thousands of living entities meet with death at every moment, but foolish living beings nonetheless think themselves deathless and do not prepare for it. This is the most astonishing thing in this world." Services like today's are a reminder to us all that death is very close by, but we have a severe aversion to thinking about it, which seems natural. Our souls are trapped in a temporary vessel, and the removal of the soul can be quite terrifying to all participants. So how do we prepare for such an occasion? Prayer, singing the glories of God, worship, talking about God and God's past experiences. Jesus implores us to pray the Our Father. In that prayer he says, "Hallowed be thy name." God's name is great. To realize its greatness, we think we need to recite it and remember it every day. In my spiritual practice, remembering God is the focus. God's name is non-different than God. So every day I recite 3 of his names. They are names of God in Sanskrit, one of the oldest languages on the planet. Hare, Krishna, and Rama. God has many different names: Yahweh, Jehovah, Jesus Christ, Allah, Elohim, Al Shaddai, Abba, Govinda, Gopal. The list goes on. So every day I recite this simple prayer. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If you prefer to recite the Jesus prayer, please do. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. As we celebrate Mom's life, I've realized the temporary nature of our world and our relationships. People come and go, birth and death. I still love Mom, but I know our relationship has changed forever, and so I choose to focus my energy on my eternal relationship with our sweet Lord, and I hope you can do the same. Thank you for tolerating me, and I hope we can continue to live to the fullest, life to the fullest, as my mother requested all her children to do. One last thing, I want to thank Mom for her patience, kindness, tolerance, generosity, loving hugs, winks, smiles, consoling words, advice, wonderful cooking and baking, support for my marriage, and so much more. Thank you, Mom. So I
Hare
thought
Krishna.
that was interesting.
Jai, Haribol.
Very nice.
That's a good one.
Go to that verse. Okay, any other, did you still want to share something, Maternath? All right, Gio, one last, gonna have a last comment question here.
I have a question. Does death also mean that Does death also mean that we have to change conceptions in life?
What do you mean by conception?
Maybe like, when we have, so we have a death in the family, but also we have to think about like, so can we also say that like death is also, changing our conception from thinking ourselves immortal to thinking ourselves, temporary, changing conceptions. Or thinking ourselves invincible to thinking ourselves maybe vulnerable. Is that also a way of looking at death?
You're saying, like, we could call that death by our conception changing from, like, you're saying, can we call that death?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I change from, like, your a conception of life is dying, like this idea that the body is dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like a poetic way of saying it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, because, our conceptions, it's kind of a nuanced point, but, you could say that as like a poetic way of saying it. But it's not like, something's dying, like a living entity is dying, which is generally what death is defined for, loss of life. But in one sense, you're losing misconceptions, or you're transforming your conception. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bo.